Welcome to episode 22. We're finally going to put some epoxy on the hull. All the puttying and smoothing's been finished. So I need to put a coat on now to seal the timber, a coat of epoxy that is, to seal the timber, and then I'll be able to start glassing. So as I put that coat of epoxy on, I'll be putting peel ply on, and then we'll be able to rip that off and hopefully without sanding be able to put the glass on. So before I actually start the glassing, I have to temporarily fit the stern tube so that I can insert the bolts and get those settled in place and seal the holes in the side of the deadwood. And then I'm going to glass behind the stern tube and bearing and tighten up the bolts so that it's got a nice flat mating surface for the sealing when it eventually gets fitted for good. So also I'll glass the bottom of the keel where the rudder is, between the propeller and the rudder, so that when the boat gets turned back over, I'll finish that off by glassing that in the upright position. It's far easier to glass when it's upright than it is upside down, so I'll do that. So hopefully that'll all be shown in this episode, as well as a lot of glassing. So I hope you enjoy it. I'm certainly enjoying doing it. So I'll see you at the end. You might remember in the last episode I talked about the bell. Got no knocker, and I said maybe I'll get a knocker and a little rope thing for it. Well, a friend of mine, Glenn Gandy from Splicing and Cutting Services, they supply all our ropes at work. He has a friend at Harvey Bay Historical Village, which I think is a maritime museum in Harvey Bay. Brian Taylor, he's a man who is expert in rope work and what you'd call a master roper, a rope worker. He supplied me with, through Glenn, he supplied me with a hanger for the knocker, for the bell. So thank you very much, Brian. He also gave a little ocean plat mat and a little cross to hang in the boat as well, if I want to. So it was very thoughtful and lovely of you, Brian, so thank you very much. Well, this is the ball valve I put on. It's a half-inch ball valve, it's about 12 millimetres through the middle. When I tried to do some filling up of containers, it's very slow. So one of the viewers said, why don't you use a honey gate? And I thought, well, that's a really funny thing for him to say, because I should have thought of that myself. There's beehives out there. I keep bees, so I've got a few honey gates floating around. Fitted one to a plug, a honey gate that is, and that's the metal part is the plug that was originally in the 200 litre drum, or 200 kilogram drum. So I'll spin that drum up and take it out. That's nice and quick.
That's good.
It's got to be, is it 400, wasn't it?
400, yep.
Oh, gee, that was quick.
Really?
Now we need 100, don't we?
Yes.
So we'll make it 510. Or 500 and 504 is good. that's where it is.
Itself off.
thing I had forgotten to show you was we've now got a fully carpeted boat shed. And that's to try and keep the dust down while we're glassing. So it's all looking good. And the hull's now ready to put the first coat of epoxy on. But we came here this morning to do that and found that there were drips. So I've had to put a roof inside the roof. That's just, what do they call that stuff? What do they call that white stuff, Roger? Polytarp, isn't it?
Polytarp.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, so we've had to put polytarp roof over the boat. So if the water leaks in, it'll just sit in that thing. So then as the afternoon wore away, the boat dried out again. So we did a couple of pieces of epoxy and put peel ply on, so it'll be ready to glass when that comes off, probably after a little bit of sanding. So the boat's starting to look like a real boat now. Anyway, I'm going away for the weekend, so I won't be doing any work on it till next week sometime.
Alright, you want me to come and hold it there?
Well, I think
Rolling it down?
I'm just going to let it roll down here, and I think that'll do. There'll be a little bit here that we'll fix up later. We've seen a bit of the starboard side having that first coat of epoxy. So now here are the first and last panels on the port side. Although I didn't show it, a reasonably heavy coat of resin is rolled on, and then the peel ply fabric was squeegeed onto the resin to try and force it to make contact without any air bubbles underneath. This is easier said than done, and after doing the first coat on the whole of the hull, I still haven't become comfortable with the process. So now, with a bit of extra sanding, the surface of the hull is now ready for glass. In glassing this hull, one of my major concerns is to ensure a good seal at the two sets of openings into the hull through the glass. One where the bow thruster tunnel goes through the hull, and also another where the propeller shaft rear bearing is mounted. The bow thruster tunnel is relatively straightforward, but care needs to be taken with the mating surface between the shaft bearing and the hull. I fitted the two bolts for the stern bearing and put the stern tube along with the rear shaft bearing into place and tightened up the bolts. There needs to be locking nuts at the forward end which will prevent rotation of the bolts when the stern tube and bearing are tightened up. This means there are 3 openings into the side of the deadwood to allow access to the nuts at the forward end of these bolts, and these amount to fairly large cavities. I filled those holes with marine flex sealant and then glued into place tight-fitting wooden pieces to the level of the surface of the deadwood. And that gave me a smooth surface to beginning the glassing process. Before the blocks were glued in place, I removed the stern tube and bearing so the surfaces around that area could be properly prepared after gluing. All the edges were rounded to make sure that the 3 layers of glass would take the correct shape. What I'm trying to do here is glass this area where the stern gland bolts on so that I can bolt the stern gland to this and make it a nice meeting, a nice face to be able to seal later on when it's permanently installed. I don't know how it's going to go, but I'll give it a go. I made a pattern of the spacing of the bolts and the shaft hole, and I used this to mark up the 3 layers of glass to be fitted in this area. As you can see, this is a slow process, and I started off by trying to bed in each of the 3 layers of glass on the sides of the deadwood. Pretty soon I gave up and bolted the stern tube and the bearing back in place to compress the resin-soaked glass, and then started wetting out the turnbacks onto the side of the deadwood.
If you look closely, you'll see that there's a final layer of peel ply over the glass, and also the stern tube is taped up to prevent the epoxy from gluing it in place. And also there's a plastic sleeve between the stern bearing and the peel ply. All these measures help to make it possible to remove the stern bearing and the tube after the epoxy had set. Finally, I glassed the underside of the keel after the dead wood. I did the 3 layers and staggered them so there won't be any dramatic differences in thickness when it's finished. Finally, peel ply was fitted to make a good finish. At the aft end of the keel there's a plate which holds the bottom of the rudder, and this was originally held with 2 3/8 copper bolts riveted in place after the rudder was fitted. This won't work with the keel being glassed, So I'm going to countersink the underside of the keel to accept nuts. And when the rudder is finally fitted, the countersinks for the nuts can be filled and glassed over for a final seal.
Well, I'm sorry, I promised you a lot of fiberglassing and you only got a little bit. So I'll make you another promise. Next episode will definitely be about glassing the surface of the hull. So a lot of preparation here, and it's been good fun. So I look forward to episode 23 soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.